I'm Jessica, 28, and I still remember the humiliation of sitting at my mother-in-law Diane's mahogany dinner table as she served sizzling ribeye steaks to everyone except me. The aroma of perfectly seasoned meat filled the air while I stared down at my plain garden salad, no dressing. 3 years of subtle jabs and backhanded compliments had culminated in this moment of blatant disrespect. My husband Brian squeezed my hand under the table, but his silence spoke volumes. What Diane didn't realize was that her public display of contempt would be the catalyst for a reckoning she never saw coming. Before I dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe if you want more real family drama. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Portland, where my parents taught me the value of hard work and respect. My dad worked as an electrician, and my mom was an elementary school teacher. Nothing came easy. I worked part-time throughout high school and secured a partial scholarship for college, supplementing it with student loans and a weekend job at a local coffee shop. I was proud of what I'd accomplished through my own merit. I met Brian during our junior year at university. We shared a literature class, and he asked to borrow my notes after missing a lecture. What started as study sessions evolved into late-night conversations about our dreams and ambitions. Brian was studying business with plans to join his father's investment firm. He was intelligent, kind, and had this infectious laugh that made everyone around him smile. After 2 years of dating, he proposed during a weekend trip to the coast. The first time Brian mentioned his mother, I noticed a slight shift in his demeanor. "She can be particular," he said, "but she means well." I brushed it off, assuming all mothers were protective of their sons. When I finally met Diane at a restaurant Brian selected, she appeared perfectly polite. She was immaculately dressed in designer clothes, her blonde hair styled in an elegant bob. Her smile never quite reached her eyes as she looked me up and down. "Jessica," she said, drawing out each syllable of my name. "Brian has told us so little about you." Howard, Brian's father, was friendlier but clearly deferred to his wife in all social matters. He was a successful businessman who had built his firm from the ground up, yet in Diane's presence, he became almost invisible. Their dynamic confused me, but I was determined to make a good impression. Brian's sister Amanda was cut from the same cloth as her mother, polished, poised, and quietly condescending. She spoke exclusively about her achievements as a marketing executive and her recent engagement to a surgeon. Every question she asked me felt like an interview I was failing. "Oh, a state university? How accessible," she remarked when I mentioned my alma mater. Tyler, Brian's younger brother, was slightly warmer. He at least attempted conversation about my interests, though I noticed he would glance at his mother for approval before agreeing with anything I said. The first holiday dinner at the Hartley family home revealed more about the dynamics I was marrying into. Their Tudor-style mansion sat on 2 acres in the most exclusive neighborhood in the city. Inside, everything was pristine, cream-colored furniture that looked never used, crystal vases holding perfect flower arrangements, and family photos where everyone wore color-coordinated outfits. Diane seated me at the far end of the table, away from Brian. "We always sit boy-girl," she explained, though I noticed this rule seemed to apply only to me. Throughout dinner, she repeatedly called me Jennifer despite Brian correcting her. When I offered to help with dessert, she patted my arm and said, "No need, dear. These family recipes are quite complex." The emphasis on family wasn't subtle. After dinner, Diane showed me their family photo albums but skipped past Brian's college years. When I asked about them, she stiffened. That's when he was dating Heather. They were together for nearly 4 years, her father is a state senator, you know. We were all quite surprised when they broke up. Brian seemed oblivious to these undercurrents or chose to ignore them. When I mentioned some of Diane's comments on the drive home, he sighed. "Mom's just traditional. She'll warm up once she gets to know you." But as months passed and we planned our wedding, Diane's traditional nature revealed itself in more troubling ways. She fought us on every decision, from the venue to the guest list. She insisted on inviting Heather, the ex-girlfriend, claiming they were still close family friends. Brian initially defended me but eventually gave in to keep the peace. Our wedding day was beautiful despite Diane's interference, but the photos captured her tight-lipped smile and the distance she maintained. I entered marriage hopeful that time would improve our relationship, but increasingly concerned by Brian's pattern of appeasing his mother at my expense. Over the next 3 years, Diane's behavior followed a predictable pattern of escalation. What began as subtle jabs evolved into unmistakable disrespect, with each incident slightly worse than the last, like a carefully calculated campaign. The first Christmas as a married couple, I spent hours selecting a personalized gift for Diane, a handcrafted photo album filled with family pictures, including several from our wedding. When she opened it, she merely said, "How crafty," before setting it aside. Minutes later, she exclaimed with delight over Amanda's gift of designer perfume. My gift remained untouched on the side table for the remainder of our visit. 3 months later, I baked Diane's favorite lemon cake for her birthday, following a recipe I'd practiced for weeks. "It's a bit dry," she commented after one small bite, then proceeded to tell everyone about the divine cake Heather used to make. Brian squeezed my hand under the table but said nothing. By our first anniversary, I was still trying to win Diane's approval. I offered to help with her annual garden party, arriving early to arrange flowers and set up tables. As guests arrived, Diane introduced me as Brian's wife rather than by name. Later, I overheard her telling her friends, "She's trying so hard, bless her heart." Not quite what we envisioned for Brian, but we're making the best of it. During family photos at Thanksgiving, I was consistently positioned at the edge of the frame, easy to crop out. In one instance, the photographer suggested I move to stand next to Brian, and Diane quickly interjected, "No, let's keep the symmetry. Jessica can stay where she is." In the resulting photos, I appeared as an afterthought, barely connected to the family unit. The most revealing moments came when Diane thought I couldn't hear her. One evening at their house, I returned from the bathroom to hear her talking to Brian in the kitchen. "She just doesn't fit, Brian," Diane was saying. "The Andersons' daughter just moved back from New York, she's a lawyer now. Remember how well you two got along at swim club?" "Mom, stop. I'm married to Jessica. I love her." Brian's defense sounded rehearsed, tired. "Love changes, darling. First marriages often don't last." When I entered the kitchen, they both fell silent. Brian wouldn't meet my eyes. On the drive home, I asked Brian about the conversation. "Mom's just being mom," he said dismissively. "You know how she gets these ideas." It doesn't mean anything. But it did mean something. Each family gathering became an exercise in endurance. At Diane's annual 4th of July barbecue, she served everyone homemade ice cream except me, claiming she miscounted. During a weekend at their lake house, I discovered my suitcase had been accidentally placed in the garage rather than the guest room. Small incidents, always with plausible deniability. That Christmas, Diane outdid herself. She presented everyone with thoughtfully selected gifts, a custom watch for Howard, a spa weekend for Amanda, golf clubs for Tyler, and an expensive leather briefcase for Brian. My gift was a generic bath set still in the store's gift wrapping. When I opened it, I found the clearance sticker still attached, $9.99. "I thought you'd appreciate something practical," Diane said sweetly. No one seemed to notice or care about the disparity. My best friend Allison became my lifeline during these times. Over coffee one day, I broke down describing the latest slight. "Jess, this isn't normal," she insisted. "Brian needs to stand up to his mother. She's trying to break you down, and he's letting it happen." That night, I finally confronted Brian directly. "Your mother is deliberately trying to make me feel unwelcome, and you do nothing." "You're being sensitive," he replied. "Mom's just set in her ways." "Set in her ways?" "Brian, she forgot my birthday but remembered to send flowers to your ex-girlfriend. Heather's mom and my mom are friends. It was just courtesy. Do you hear yourself? You always have an excuse for her behavior. Either you don't see it, or you don't want to see it." Brian's face hardened. My family is important to me, Jessica. I won't turn against them because you feel insecure. His words stung like a slap. The distance between us grew as Brian retreated further into his family's orbit, and I began to question whether our marriage could survive Diane's interference and Brian's complicity. March marked Howard and Diane's 35th wedding anniversary. Diane planned what she called an intimate family celebration at their home, her code for excluding my parents while including distant relatives and family friends. I spent hours selecting an appropriate outfit, finally deciding on a navy blue dress that conveyed respect without drawing attention. Brian approved with a distracted nod as he took a business call. I also carefully selected a gift, an antique silver frame holding a restored photograph of Howard and Diane on their wedding day that I'd tracked down through Howard's sister. It had cost nearly a month's worth of my teaching salary, but I hoped it might finally break through Diane's wall of disapproval. We arrived exactly on time. Diane considered earliness presumptuous and lateness disrespectful. The house gleamed with extra polish, fresh flowers adorned every surface, and classical music played softly in the background. Diane greeted us in the foyer wearing a champagne-colored cocktail dress, her jewelry catching the light as she air-kissed Brian's cheeks. Jessica, she acknowledged with a nod before turning back to her son. Brian, darling, several of your father's partners are here. They're eager to discuss the Robertson account. The gift I held remained unacknowledged. In the formal living room, Howard greeted me with his usual vague friendliness while Diane steered Brian toward a group of older men. Amanda and her fiancé David were already holding court near the fireplace, with Tyler and his new girlfriend Megan nodding along to whatever Amanda was saying. I stood awkwardly at the periphery until Howard's sister Nancy took pity and engaged me in conversation. When dinner was announced, I discovered the seating arrangement placed me between Howard's elderly aunt and a business associate's wife I'd never met, while Brian sat between his mother and Amanda at the opposite end of the table. The placement wasn't coincidental. Diane had ensured we couldn't communicate throughout the meal. The dining room had been transformed with Diane's finest china, crystal glasses, and silver candelabras. White roses and orchids formed an elaborate centerpiece, and personalized place cards in calligraphy marked each setting. I noticed the business associate's wife had been with them for less than a year, yet her name was spelled correctly while mine had an extra I, Jessica, despite 3 years of marriage. Conversation flowed around me as the first course of French onion soup was served. I made polite small talk with Aunt Edith, who kept confusing me with someone named Patricia. When the soup plates were cleared, Diane stood at the head of the table beside Howard. For our anniversary dinner, we're serving Howard's favorite, aged ribeye steaks, prepared by Chef Michel who catered our wedding. She beamed at the appreciative murmurs. The server, actually their regular housekeeper in a black uniform, began presenting beautifully plated steaks to each guest. The meat was perfectly seared, accompanied by roasted potatoes, asparagus, and a red wine reduction. The aroma was mouth-watering after the light soup course. The server worked her way around the table systematically, placing identical plates before each guest. When she reached me, however, she hesitated, glanced at Diane, then moved past to serve Aunt Edith. Conversation dimmed as people noticed the disruption in service. Diane cleared her throat. Jessica is served differently, she announced. The server returned with a plate containing a simple garden salad, lettuce, 2 cherry tomatoes, and a few cucumber slices. No dressing, no garnish, and certainly no steak. Jessica mentioned trying to lose weight for summer, Diane explained to the table, though I had said no such thing. I thought she'd appreciate a lighter option. A moment of uncomfortable silence fell as all eyes turned to me. Brian looked down at his plate, his knuckles white around his fork. Tyler shifted uncomfortably while Amanda suppressed a smirk. How thoughtful, I managed to say, my voice steady despite the humiliation burning through me. I felt my cheeks flame as I picked up my salad fork with a hand that wasn't quite steady. Conversation awkwardly resumed. The business associate to my right avoided looking at me directly, focusing intently on cutting his steak. Aunt Edith patted my hand sympathetically but said nothing. I pushed lettuce around my plate while everyone exclaimed over the quality of the meat. "Melts in your mouth," Amanda declared. "Mother, you've outdone yourself." Halfway through the meal, I excused myself to the bathroom, locking the door before allowing a few tears to escape. I stared at my reflection, debating whether to leave or endure the rest of this farce. Pride won out. I wouldn't give Diane the satisfaction of driving me away. When I returned, the table was being cleared for dessert. Brian finally met my eyes with an apologetic look that did nothing to ease the knot in my stomach. Howard appeared uncomfortable but, as usual, deferred to his wife. "Now for dessert," Diane announced. Individual chocolate soufflés with Grand Marnier, a family recipe. Again, the server distributed identical desserts to everyone at the table. Again, she skipped me. This time, no explanation was offered. No alternative was provided. I simply sat with an empty place setting while everyone around me savored the decadent dessert. Brian leaned over to whisper something to his mother. She responded with a theatrical gasp. "Oh my, did we forget Jessica's dessert? How careless." She made no move to correct the situation. I maintained my composure, sipping water and forcing a neutral expression. Just as I thought the ordeal was ending, Diane rose to propose a toast, champagne flutes appearing for everyone, including me, finally. As she moved around the table to clink glasses with each guest, her elbow accidentally bumped my arm, sending red wine from a nearby glass cascading down the front of my navy dress. "Oh dear," she exclaimed without a trace of genuine concern. "Jessica, you should rinse that immediately before it sets. There's stain remover under the bathroom sink." As I stood with wine dripping from my dress, I caught Brian's expression, not anger at his mother's behavior, but annoyance at the disruption to his perfect family dinner. In that moment, something inside me hardened. This would be the last time Diane Hartley humiliated me without consequences. The drive home from Diane's anniversary dinner was tense with unspoken anger. Brian drove in silence while I stared out the passenger window, the wine stain on my dress now a damp, dark patch that reeked of alcohol. When we finally reached our apartment, the dam broke. "Are you going to say anything about what happened tonight?" I demanded, throwing my purse onto the counter. Brian loosened his tie with a sigh. "Jessica, I know Mom was a bit rude." "A bit rude?" "She deliberately humiliated me in front of your entire family and their friends. She served me a plain salad while everyone got steak. She gave me nothing when everyone got dessert. Then she spilled wine on me." "The wine was an accident," Brian defended automatically. "Nothing your mother does is an accident. She's been systematically trying to make me feel unwelcome since the day we met, and you've allowed it every step of the way." Brian ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "You're blowing this out of proportion. Mom just gets carried away sometimes with her planning. I'm sure she didn't mean." "Stop," I interrupted. "Stop making excuses for her. Why can't you admit what's happening? Why can't you stand up for me, just once?" His expression hardened. "I'm not going to attack my mother because you're oversensitive. You don't understand family loyalty." "Family loyalty? What about loyalty to your wife?" "I am your family now too, Brian." "It's different," he muttered, looking away. "How is it different? Explain it to me." Brian was silent for a long moment before speaking in a low voice. "Mom never wanted me to marry you, okay? She thought we were rushing into things." The confession landed like a physical blow. "And what did you say when she told you that?" "I told her I loved you and was going to marry you anyway." "But you never told her to respect me or treat me with basic decency?" His silence was answer enough. I felt something crack inside me, the foundation of trust one thought our marriage was built on. "What else has she said about me that you've never mentioned?" I pressed. Brian's reluctance was palpable, but he finally admitted, "She thinks you're not from the right background. That you're with me for financial security. That you'll never fit into our family's social circle. And you've been keeping all this from me for 3 years while letting her treat me like garbage?" My voice rose with disbelief. I was protecting you. Brian protested. What good would it do for you to know how she really felt? It would have let me make an informed choice about marrying into this family. You've been lying to me by omission our entire relationship. The argument stretched into the early morning hours. I learned Diane had been actively undermining our relationship from the start, suggesting suitable alternatives to Brian, highlighting my supposed shortcomings, even arranging accidental meetings with his ex-girlfriend Heather. Worse, Brian had been aware of all of it but had chosen to hide it from me while asking me to endure her treatment. Tomorrow, you need to call your mother and tell her that her behavior is unacceptable, I finally said. Either she starts treating me with respect, or we'll need to distance ourselves from your family. Brian looked panicked. I can't do that. You don't understand, family is everything to Mom. I'm your family too, Brian. You need to make a choice. He promised to speak with Diane, but his reluctance was obvious. 3 days later, he told me he'd had a good talk with his mother. According to Brian, Diane had been very receptive and had claimed she never meant to make me feel unwelcome. She apparently cried and said I had misinterpreted her actions due to our different upbringings. When I asked what specific behaviors she had agreed to change, Brian became evasive. Mom just wants everyone to get along. She said she'll try harder if you will too. If I will too? I repeated incredulously. What exactly have I done wrong? She feels you've never made an effort to understand our family traditions or fit into our social circle, Brian explained, clearly parroting his mother's words. I stared at my husband, suddenly seeing him clearly. You didn't stand up for me at all, did you? You went there, let her spin her narrative, and came back believing I'm equally at fault. Brian's expression confirmed my suspicion. He hadn't defended me, he'd allowed Diane to reframe her years of deliberate slights as mutual misunderstanding. It was a master class in manipulation, and my husband had fallen for it completely. That weekend, I called my friend Allison in tears. I don't think this marriage can be saved, I confessed. Brian will never choose me over his mother. Then you need to choose yourself, Allison said firmly. Stay with me this weekend. Give yourself space to think. I packed a small bag while Brian was at work, leaving a note explaining I needed time alone. When he called that evening, his primary concern was what he should tell his parents about my absence from their upcoming Sunday brunch. Not whether I was okay, not how to fix our marriage, but how to explain my absence to Diane. In the quiet of Allison's guest room, staring at the ceiling, I realized this wasn't just about Diane anymore. It was about Brian's fundamental inability to prioritize our marriage over his mother's approval. The steak dinner hadn't been the breaking point, it had been the revelation. Now I needed to decide what to do with this clarity. I returned home after the weekend with a renewed sense of purpose. Brian was relieved, mistaking my calm demeanor for reconciliation. In reality, I had made a decision, I would no longer accept being treated as an outsider in my own marriage. If this relationship was to survive, something needed to change dramatically. We need to talk, I told Brian that evening. I've been thinking about our situation with your mother. Jessica, please. Can't we just move past this? Brian pleaded, loosening his tie after a long day at the office. No, we can't. Not this time. This isn't going away, and neither am I, at least not without standing up for myself first. Brian looked alarmed at the implication. What are you planning? I'm going to address the situation directly, but I need to be strategic about it. Your mother cares about one thing above all else, her social standing. That's her vulnerability. I spent the next week researching Diane's social circle through social media and casual conversations with Tyler's girlfriend Megan, who proved surprisingly forthcoming. Diane, I discovered, was co-chairing the annual spring charity gala for the Children's Hospital, the most prestigious social event of the season. She had been working on it for months, and according to Megan, was desperate to impress Eleanor Blackwell, the hospital board's chairwoman and matriarch of the city's oldest family. The gala was 3 weeks away. It would be held at the Westbrook Country Club, with tickets selling for $500 per person. Diane had strong-armed friends and family into buying tables, ensuring her role as the event's primary fundraiser. Her social reputation was staked on its success. I also reconnected with Laura, a college friend who now worked in event planning for major nonprofits. Over coffee, I explained my situation without revealing my specific intentions. Classic narcissistic behavior, Laura observed. She's built her identity around controlling her family and maintaining appearances. Any threat to that facade becomes a target. How would someone like that respond to being publicly exposed? I asked. Laura considered this. It depends. If you confront her directly, she'll twist it to make you look unstable. These types are masters at playing the victim. You'd need irrefutable evidence and witnesses who matter to her. Laura's insights helped me formulate a plan that wouldn't make me look vindictive but would force Diane to face her behavior. I would attend the gala looking impeccable, be unfailingly polite, and strategically befriend the people Diane most wanted to impress. I wouldn't mention her treatment of me unless directly asked, but I would position myself where she couldn't ignore me. I visited my parents the following weekend, seeking my mother's advice without revealing the full extent of my marital problems. Mom had always been perceptive. "Something's wrong between you and Brian," she observed as we washed dishes together. "Is it his mother again?" I nodded, tears threatening. "She hates me, Mom. She always has." My mother dried her hands and turned me to face her. "Jessie, I've watched you try to win that woman's approval for 3 years. Some people don't want to be pleased, they want to be in control. The question isn't how to make her like you, but whether you can live with her dislike." "What would you do?" I asked quietly. "I'd set boundaries and stick to them. If Brian won't protect you, you must protect yourself. That doesn't necessarily mean leaving, but it does mean demanding respect." Her words strengthened my resolve. This wasn't about revenge, it was about establishing that I wouldn't be bullied out of my own marriage. I spent hours contemplating whether this approach could salvage our relationship or whether it was simply my way of taking back my dignity before walking away. Either outcome required the same first step. I practiced what I would say if confronted, rehearsing in front of the mirror to ensure my emotions wouldn't overwhelm me. I recalled instances of Diane's mistreatment, documenting them in a journal with dates and witnesses. I wasn't planning to share this record, but organizing the pattern helped solidify my confidence that I wasn't imagining things. I invested in a stunning gown, midnight blue with subtle beading that caught the light as I moved. It was more expensive than I'd normally consider, but this was an investment in my self-respect. I scheduled appointments for hair, makeup, and a manicure. If appearance was Diane's currency, I would meet her on her terms. Brian noticed the change in me but misinterpreted it as a positive sign for our marriage. "You seem happier," he commented one evening. "I'm glad you're feeling better about everything." I smiled but didn't correct him. Let him believe what he wanted, he would understand soon enough. The night before the gala, I laid out my dress, shoes, and jewelry. I reviewed the guest list Laura had helped me obtain, identifying key attendees who held influence with Diane. I wasn't planning a scene, just a strategic repositioning that would make it impossible for Diane to continue her pattern without consequences. As I fell asleep, I felt surprisingly calm. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. Either Brian would finally see his mother clearly and stand with me, or I would know with certainty that our marriage couldn't be saved. Either way, I would no longer be the helpless recipient of Diane's cruelty. Tomorrow, I would reclaim my dignity. The Westbrook Country Club's grand ballroom was transformed for the spring charity gala. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables adorned with elaborate orchid centerpieces. Ice sculptures in the shape of the Children's Hospital logo flanked the entrance, and a string quartet played softly as guests in formal attire arrived. Brian and I pulled up to the valet stand in tense silence. He had been nervous all day, sensing my determination without understanding its purpose. I stepped out of the car, smoothing my midnight blue gown. The stylist had arranged my hair in an elegant updo, accentuating the diamond drop earrings that had been my grandmother's. "You look beautiful," Brian said, sounding almost surprised. It occurred to me that he rarely looked at me this closely anymore. "Thank you," I replied, accepting his arm as we approached the entrance. Diane and Howard were greeting guests near the doorway, Diane resplendent in a designer red gown, her neck and wrists dripping with jewelry. Her smile froze momentarily when she saw me. "Brian, darling." She air-kissed both his cheeks before turning to me with a tight smile. "Jessica, I didn't realize you were coming. That dress is certainly bold." "Thank you, Diane. The gala looks wonderful, you must have worked so hard." My genuine-sounding compliment caught her off guard. Howard kissed my cheek. "You look lovely, Jessica. Glad you could make it." Diane quickly steered us inside. "Brian, the Mercer Group is at table 3. They've been asking for you." She pointedly didn't mention where I should go. "I'll find my way," I assured Brian. "Go network." "I'll mingle a bit." He looked relieved and guilty simultaneously before being whisked away by his mother. I watched them go, then turned my attention to the room, identifying key players for my research. Eleanor Blackwell, the hospital board chairwoman, was easy to spot, an elegant woman in her 70s, surrounded by people seeking her attention. Rather than approaching her directly, I circulated the room, accepting a champagne flute and making pleasant conversation with various guests. I complimented the silent auction items, asked thoughtful questions about the hospital's programs, and generally established myself as gracious and intelligent. I noticed Diane watching me from across the room, her expression growing increasingly pinched as I seamlessly integrated into conversations she'd likely hoped I'd be excluded from. When I saw Eleanor Blackwell momentarily alone near the bar, I made my move. As I approached, she dropped her program. I quickly retrieved it, noticing her struggle with arthritic hands. "These event programs are always so unwieldy," I commented, handing it back. "I'm Jessica Hartley, Brian's wife." "Eleanor Blackwell," she replied, studying me with sharp eyes. "You're Diane's daughter-in-law, yes? I don't believe we've met at previous functions." "I haven't been included in many family events," I said simply, without accusation. "But the hospital's work is too important to miss. My cousin's son was treated there for leukemia last year. The care he received was extraordinary." Eleanor's expression softened. "Which oncologist treated him?" "Dr. Ramirez. She has a remarkable way with children." "Indeed. She's one of our stars." Eleanor gestured to the seat beside her. "Join me?" These heels are murdering my feet, but appearances must be maintained. I sat gratefully, and our conversation flowed easily. I shared genuine stories about my teaching experiences and asked informed questions about the hospital's outreach programs. Eleanor seemed to appreciate speaking with someone interested in substance rather than social climbing. Across the room, I caught glimpses of Diane attempting to monitor our conversation while managing other guests. Her neck was flushed with what appeared to be irritation. When dinner was announced, I discovered I'd been seated at a back table with distant acquaintances and junior staff, clearly Diane's attempt to isolate me. I located my place card and sat down with a warm smile for my tablemates. "I'm Jessica Hartley," I introduced myself to the older couple beside me. "Walter and Margaret Donovan," the gentleman replied. "Are you affiliated with the hospital?" "I'm Brian Hartley's wife. Diane is my mother-in-law." "Ah. We've known Howard for years through the foundation," Margaret exclaimed. "We're major donors, but Diane always seats us far from the action." She whispered this with a conspiratorial wink. I suddenly realized my tablemates weren't random, they were wealthy donors Diane considered socially inferior. I'd been placed with the people she wanted to acknowledge without actually spending time with. The irony was delicious. Throughout dinner, I engaged my tablemates in genuine conversation, learning about their philanthropy and sharing appropriate stories. Walter, it turned out, had been looking for opportunities to fund educational initiatives at the hospital, exactly my area of expertise as a teacher. You should speak with Eleanor about the literacy program for long-term patients, I suggested. I'd be happy to introduce you. Would you? Diane's always too busy to make introductions, Margaret said. When the board president asked for impromptu remarks from supporters, Walter unexpectedly stood and gestured toward me. My new friend Jessica here has given me wonderful insight into how our donations could support educational programs, he announced to the room. Her passion for children's well-being is inspiring. All eyes turned to me, including Diane's horrified gaze. The board president invited me to share my thoughts. Standing gracefully, I delivered a heartfelt 2-minute speech about the importance of educational continuity for hospitalized children, drawing on my teaching experience and genuine concern. The room responded with warm applause. Eleanor Blackwell nodded approvingly, and several board members made notes. Diane's expression had transformed from horror to barely concealed fury. Brian looked stunned, whether from pride or confusion wasn't clear. After dinner, Diane made increasingly obvious attempts to intercept my conversations with influential guests. When I was speaking with a renowned pediatric surgeon, she physically inserted herself between us, nearly spilling my drink. Jessica was just leaving, she told the surgeon with a tight smile. Family emergency, isn't that right? No emergency, I replied calmly. Dr. Levin was telling me about the new neurology wing. It sounds revolutionary. I'm sure Jessica's teaching experience hardly qualifies her to understand medical facilities, Diane said with a dismissive laugh. Dr. Levin raised his eyebrows. Actually, we were discussing how teachers' insights help us design more effective recovery environments. Jessica has valuable perspective. As the evening progressed, Diane's attempts to undermine me became more desperate and obvious. She accidentally bumped into me twice, tried to redirect conversations whenever I spoke, and at one point loudly mentioned how some people didn't understand proper gala etiquette. The pivotal moment came during the live auction. I had no intention of bidding, but when a weekend package at a beachfront property came up, the same property where Brian had proposed, I raised my paddle on impulse. Diane, across the room, saw my bid and immediately raised her own paddle, driving the price higher. Our alternating bids created a stir as guests realized we were competing against each other. When the bidding reached $5,000, far more than the package was worth, I calmly lowered my paddle and smiled at Diane. She triumphantly placed the winning bid, only to realize she'd been manipulated into overpaying dramatically for something she didn't want, solely to beat me. Her face contorted with fury. This is ridiculous, she exclaimed loudly. She's deliberately trying to embarrass me at my own event. The room fell silent at her outburst. Eleanor Blackwell regarded Diane with disapproval. Diane, dear, it's a charity auction. The point is raising money for the children, Eleanor said coolly. Jessica's participation should be welcomed, not condemned. Diane's public mask finally slipped completely. You don't understand. She's been trying to undermine me all evening. She's trying to turn everyone against me. She's never fit into this family, and she never will. The silence deepened as guests witnessed Diane's meltdown. Brian finally approached his mother, looking mortified. Mom, that's enough, he said quietly. You're making a scene. I'm making a scene? Diane hissed. She's the one who came here looking like that, talking to everyone, pretending to belong. Eleanor stood slowly. I think perhaps you need a moment, Diane. Howard, would you escort your wife somewhere she can compose herself? As Howard led a fuming Diane away, Brian turned to me with conflicted eyes. For the first time, he had witnessed his mother's true nature without the filter of familial loyalty. I met his gaze steadily, neither apologizing nor gloating. This moment of clarity had been inevitable and necessary. The aftermath of Diane's public meltdown unfolded in the Westbrook Country Club's private lounge. Howard had guided his still fuming wife away from the main ballroom, with Brian following closely behind. I waited several minutes before joining them, giving Diane time to either compose herself or reveal more of her true nature to her son. When I entered the room, Diane was pacing while Howard sat stiffly on a leather sofa. Brian stood by the window, his expression troubled. All three turned as the door closed behind me. You, Diane spat, pointing a manicured finger. You planned this entire humiliation. I remained calm. I didn't plan anything, Diane. I simply attended a charity event and participated appropriately. Appropriately? You deliberately upstaged me. You spoke with my friends, charmed the board, made me look foolish with that auction stunt. Mom, Brian interrupted, Jessica didn't make you bid on that package. That was your choice. Diane looked at her son as if he'd betrayed her. You're taking her side? After everything I've done for you? This isn't about sides, I said quietly. This is about patterns of behavior that have gone unchallenged for too long. What patterns? Howard asked, speaking up for the first time. He looked genuinely confused. I took a deep breath and began calmly listing incidents: the first Christmas when my gift was ignored. The birthday when my cake was dismissed. Being seated at the far end of every family table. Being introduced as Brian's wife rather than by my name. The garden party where I was the only one not offered dessert. The family photos where I'm positioned to be easily cropped out. And most recently, being served a plain salad while everyone else received steak at your anniversary dinner. Howard's eyes widened. Diane, did you really do those things? She's exaggerating, Diane dismissed. She's always been oversensitive, looking for slights where none exist. I have documentation, I said, surprising everyone. Dates, witnesses, photographs. For 3 years, I've endured systematic exclusion and disrespect. I initially thought it was unintentional, but the pattern is undeniable. This is absurd, Diane scoffed. Brian, are you going to allow her to attack me like this? Brian looked torn. Mom, some of what Jessica's describing. I've seen it happen. I just didn't want to believe you were doing it deliberately. Of course it was deliberate, came a new voice from the doorway. Amanda stood there, elegantly draped against the frame. Mothers never approved of Jessica. She told me so the day Brian announced their engagement. Amanda. Diane hissed. This doesn't concern you. Doesn't it? I've watched you try to break them up for 3 years. It's getting embarrassing. Amanda entered the room fully, followed by Tyler. Even Tyler's noticed, and he barely notices anything beyond his golf handicap. Hey, Tyler protested mildly, but didn't disagree. Howard stood up, his expression hardening. Diane, I want a straight answer. Have you been deliberately mistreating Jessica all this time? Diane's composure cracked further. You don't understand. She's not right for Brian. She's not from our world. She doesn't understand our traditions, our social obligations. She's a public school teacher, for heaven's sake. And what's wrong with that? Howard asked, his voice unexpectedly firm. My mother was a teacher. You know that. That was different, Diane insisted. Your mother knew her place. She deferred to your father's family. She adapted. Jessica expects us to change for her. No, I corrected quietly. I expected basic respect as your son's chosen partner. Nothing more. You've been trying to take my son away from his family. Diane's voice rose again. Mom, that's not true, Brian finally said with conviction. Jessica has encouraged me to maintain close family ties. She's the one who remembers everyone's birthdays, who suggested regular Sunday dinners. You're the one who's been trying to drive someone away, and it's not me you wanted gone. The raw truth hung in the air. Howard looked at his wife of 35 years with new eyes. Diane, he said quietly, this stops now. I've allowed you to control our family dynamics because it seemed easier. That was my mistake, and I apologize to Jessica for it. Diane's eyes filled with tears. Howard, you can't possibly. I can and I am, he interrupted with unusual firmness. Your behavior tonight was inexcusable. You humiliated yourself, not Jessica. It's her fault. Diane insisted, voice breaking. She made me lose control. No, Mother, Amanda said unexpectedly. You did that all on your own. And honestly, it's been coming for years. You've done the same thing to every woman who's entered this family, including Tyler's girlfriends. We've all just been too afraid to stand up to you. Afraid? Diane looked genuinely shocked. Of me? But I've done everything for this family. I've organized our lives, maintained our social standing, ensured you had every advantage. While making us walk on eggshells, Tyler added quietly. Always afraid of disappointing you, of not meeting your standards. Brian moved to stand beside me, taking my hand. Mom, we love you. But Jessica is my wife, and I've failed her by not standing up for her sooner. That ends tonight. Diane stared at her son, then at me, her expression shifting from anger to something more vulnerable, fear. What are you saying? I'm saying you have a choice, Brian replied. You can accept Jessica as my wife and treat her with respect, or you can continue this behavior and see a lot less of us. You'd choose her over your own mother? Diane's voice was small now. I'm choosing my marriage, Brian corrected. I'm choosing to be a better husband than I've been. The question is whether you can choose to be a better mother-in-law. Diane sank onto the sofa, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. For the first time, I felt a flicker of empathy. Behind her perfect facade was a deeply insecure woman who feared losing her son, her status, her carefully controlled family system. Diane, I said gently, I've never wanted to replace you in Brian's life. There's room for both of us to love him. All I've ever wanted was to be accepted as part of this family. She looked up, mascara slightly smudged. You've made me look like a monster tonight. No, Howard said firmly. Your behavior did that. But you can make different choices going forward. Diane looked from face to face, her husband's newfound resolve, her daughter's defiance, her son's determination, and my steady gaze. Something shifted in her expression. I need time to think, she finally said. Take all the time you need, I replied, standing to leave. But understand that I won't accept being mistreated anymore. Neither will Brian. As we left the room, I felt lighter than I had in years. Whether this confrontation saved my marriage or simply allowed me to leave it with dignity remained to be seen. But either way, I had finally broken the cycle of silent endurance. I had found my voice. 1 month after the charity gala, I sat in my classroom after hours, grading papers and reflecting on how much had changed. Brian and I had spent 2 weeks living separately, he staying with a college friend while I remained in our apartment. The distance had given us both clarity. My phone buzzed with a text from Brian. Can we talk tonight? I'll bring dinner from that Thai place you like. I smiled slightly. During our separation, Brian had been doing serious reflection on his role in enabling his mother's behavior. Our conversations had become more honest, more raw than they'd been in years. When he arrived that evening, he looked nervous but determined. He set up our dinner, then took my hands across the table. I've been seeing a therapist, he confessed. Turns out I have some serious issues with conflict avoidance and family enmeshment. Who knew? His self-deprecating smile made something warm unfurl in my chest. This was the Brian I'd fallen in love with, capable of growth and insight. I'm sorry, Jessica. Not just for what happened at the gala, but for 3 years of failing you. I chose the path of least resistance instead of standing by my wife. I understand why, I admitted. Standing up to Diane isn't easy. No, but it was necessary. And I should have done it long ago. He squeezed my hands. I love you. I want our marriage to work, but I know I need to earn back your trust. We agreed to try couples therapy. Our first session was uncomfortable but revelatory. Dr. Winters helped us establish healthy boundaries and communication patterns. Brian committed to defending those boundaries with his family, while I worked on expressing my needs more clearly. 2 months after the gala, Diane called me directly, something that had never happened before. Jessica, she said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Howard and I would like to invite you and Brian for dinner this Sunday. Just the four of us. I felt immediate apprehension. Diane, I appreciate the invitation, but I'm not sure I'm ready to. Please, she interrupted. I understand if you refuse. But I'd like a chance to start over. After discussing it with Brian and our therapist, I cautiously agreed. As we pulled up to the Hartley home that Sunday, my stomach was in knots. We can leave any time you want, Brian assured me, squeezing my hand. Just say the word. The house looked the same, but something felt different. Howard opened the door, greeting us both with genuine warmth. Diane stood in the foyer, less immaculately put together than usual. She'd aged somehow in the past months, the vulnerability I'd glimpsed at the gala now more apparent. Jessica, Brian. Thank you for coming. Her usual commanding tone was subdued. Dinner was served in the smaller family dining room rather than the formal one. I noticed immediately that the place settings were identical, no special china for some and everyday settings for others. Diane seemed nervous, dropping a spoon and apologizing profusely. I'm not very good at this, she admitted as we sat down. Being different than I've always been. Howard gave her an encouraging nod. She took a deep breath. Jessica, I owe you an apology. A sincere one, not the surface politeness I've hidden behind. She looked directly at me for perhaps the first time. My behavior toward you has been inexcusable. For 3 years, I've treated you as an outsider, an intruder in our family. I've been petty, cruel, and manipulative. The blunt admission stunned me into silence. I've been seeing a counselor, Diane continued. Howard insisted, actually. Turns out I have some issues with control. And fear of abandonment. She smiled weakly. I was terrified of losing Brian, of being replaced. Instead of welcoming you, I tried to drive you away. Mom's been doing a lot of work, Brian said quietly. We all have. When the main course was served, I couldn't help noticing that it was steak, perfectly cooked ribeye for everyone, including me. Diane saw my expression and flushed slightly. I thought perhaps we could make new associations with this meal, she explained. Better memories. Throughout dinner, Diane made visible efforts to include me in conversation, asking thoughtful questions about my teaching and actually listening to the answers. Howard seemed more animated than I'd ever seen him, sharing stories about his own mother who had indeed been a teacher. There were awkward moments and uncomfortable silences, but they felt like growing pains rather than hostile tension. After dessert, which everyone received equally, Diane asked if she could speak with me privately. Brian gave me a questioning look, but I nodded reassuringly. In the garden, surrounded by her prized roses, Diane seemed smaller somehow. I don't expect you to forgive me immediately, she said. Or perhaps ever. But I want you to know I'm committed to changing. You showed remarkable strength and dignity at the gala. You could have humiliated me publicly, but you didn't. You simply stood your ground. I never wanted to hurt you, Diane, I said honestly. I just wanted to be respected. I understand that now. She hesitated. Howard and I are renewing our vows for our upcoming anniversary. A small ceremony, just family. We'd be honored if you'd help me plan it. Only if you want to, of course. The olive branch was unexpected but sincere. I'd like that, I replied, surprising myself. The path forward wasn't seamless. There were setbacks, moments when Diane slipped into old patterns and had to catch herself, times when Brian's conflict avoidance resurfaced. But there was progress too. Each Sunday dinner became slightly more comfortable than the last. When Amanda announced her pregnancy, Diane included me in the baby shower planning committee without hesitation. Most surprisingly, a tentative friendship began to form between Amanda and me. Away from Diane's influence, she revealed a sharp wit and unexpected vulnerability. I was awful to you, she admitted over coffee one day. I was mimicking Mom, trying to stay in her good graces. I'm sorry, Jessica. 1 year after the infamous steak dinner incident, we gathered at the Hartley home to celebrate Howard and Diane's vow renewal. The ceremony was intimate and genuine, with Howard showing more backbone and Diane more humility than I'd ever witnessed from either. At the reception, Diane approached me with 2 champagne flutes. "I want to thank you," she said, handing me one. "You could have given up on this family, on Brian, on all of us. Instead, you forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths. We're healthier for it." "Family is worth fighting for," I replied. "Even when it's difficult. Especially then." She nodded, understanding washing over her features. "I wish I'd welcomed you from the beginning. We've wasted so much time." "Not wasted," I corrected gently. "It was part of the journey that got us here." As I rejoined Brian, watching him chat easily with Tyler while maintaining a respectful distance from his mother, I realized we had all transformed. Our marriage was stronger now, built on honest communication rather than appeasement. Diane was learning to define herself beyond her role as matriarch. Howard was finding his voice. We were becoming a real family, imperfect but genuine. The journey hadn't been easy, and there would be challenges ahead. But standing up for myself had not only preserved my dignity, it had ultimately healed wounds I'd thought were permanent. Sometimes, confronting a difficult truth is the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for those around you. I would never again accept a plain salad while others feasted. And surprisingly, neither would Diane want me to. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have confronted your mother-in-law earlier, or tried a different approach? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you want to hear more stories about standing up for yourself in difficult family situations. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, you deserve a seat at the table, both literally and figuratively.